Hello, everyone. My name is Irmak.
Hey, I'm Lydia.
We're two students taking sleep and dreams this quarter. And for our outreach project, we did an insomnia support group at Stanford to understand what kind of sleep disorders people are dealing with and how they're dealing with their insomnia and what they would think is helpful from students that are taking sleep and dreams based on what we learn in our class.
Mhm. Yeah, so in our workshop, we brought together 25 participants for one 2 hour long meeting. We spent 1 hour presenting on insomnia and also tips for combating insomnia and improving your own sleeping habits. And then we also spent an hour on answering questions and sort of sharing sleep experiences in a group and what are the different factors that are impacting your sleep and maybe which tips you want to have as a takeaway from this insomnia support group.
Yeah, and we also had people share out about their experiences and ask us questions to see what we could be helpful with most. And we just wanted to share some of our findings with you to tell you about what the broader group of Stanford people might be experiencing. So the most commonly faced sleep issues in our group were falling asleep, which was one of the biggest ones, staying asleep, waking up on time, and like waking up and not feeling groggy. So feeling well rested was a big problem. And therefore, this led to problems with staying energetic throughout the day. And also, what we found was most of our participants were experiencing one or more of these problems perpetually, which aligns with the definition of insomnia that we heard about in class.
Mhm. Um, Afterwards, we also talked about the coping mechanisms that people often have for like various things. And so, for example, a lot of people listed phone use as something that they tried to use in order to like kind of mend their sleeping habits. So regulating the time periods in which they would use their phones, trying not to use their phones after it was too late. A lot of people also mentioned over-the-counter sleep aids, including melatonin. Um, and people also mentioned reading. So, as sort of a wind down exercise, perhaps like reading for an hour before bed. I think some people also mentioned that this was just helpful because, I mean, they had to do it for class anyways. But I think it was also good in the sense that it gave them some time away from a screen and also led them to like slower activity that could also just help them fall asleep. People also mentioned in a sort of a similar vein of being sort of conscientious about what times they're using their phones. They also mentioned sort of regulating the hours at which they were drinking caffeine. So I think most people have mentioned maybe trying to stop any sort of caffeine drinking after dinner, but also sort of being careful about not having too much caffeine too late too often if, for example, they needed to stay up late sort of consecutive nights in order to finish projects, being careful not to become dependent on caffeine during those instances. People also mentioned naps. I think people's responses to naps varied based on like how long they napped for and also what times of days that they napped, but they definitely did mention that as sort of a way of regulating their sleep. And then also people mentioned watching TV if they couldn't fall asleep, which again is maybe not the most preferable way to fall asleep, but I think it is certainly a quick way to get people to doze off if they're already tired.
Yeah, so after hearing about what people were struggling with and what they were kind of doing to manage their habits, we went on to present about defining insomnia as a symptom that becomes a syndrome, and we tried to like kind of define when exactly it becomes a syndrome. So like after like a 3 month period of like perpetually experiencing these problems, which actually made people realize that they might have insomnia even if they didn't realize it. Not that we're professionals, but I think it's just helpful to have that information and we also told them about the biology behind insomnia that we learned in class, such as the circadian rhythm and how that's influenced by light and by caffeine use, and how late night studying in front of computers with lights on impacts our circadian rhythm, making insomnia a perpetual problem. And also the psychology of insomnia, as in if you're worried about sleep constantly, if you're constantly worried about not getting enough rest and not feeling um, well energized, and when you get to bed you're just simply worried about whether you're going to be able to fall asleep or not, that's going to end up becoming a perpetual problem that you can't necessarily manage with simply just medication or turning off your phone, and then it becomes a more of a psychological problem that you might have to manage with other things such as mindfulness or therapy. And we shared some tips from sleep and dreams lectures and from guest speakers and tried to see what tips that Stanford students liked the most based on what we saw that they were already doing.
Mhm. And so we also discussed what a lot of the people in the group attributed their insomnia to. So everyone in the group mentioned academic stress and intense schoolwork. Obviously, I think a lot of people would have ideally wanted their sleep schedules to be a lot better, but just based on the nature of having lots of assignments and having lots of responsibilities piling up, they often did find themselves against their own interests and against their own wishes, pushing back against their sleep schedule in order to complete schoolwork and assignments. Others also mentioned personal stressors and mental health. So in this case, lots of, anything that was happening in their life could also lead to like more anxiety and like more worry, and was like leading to less fitful and less restful sleep. Also, I think couple about like over half-ish of the students mentioned overthinking about sleep once it becomes a perpetual problem. And again, I think this is connected to the fact that every single student mentioned academic stress and intense schoolwork. But I think once students had hit a point where they were already pushing back against their sleep schedules in order to complete assignments, once they were cognizant of the fact that their sleep wasn't as ideal as they wanted to be, then, it kind of becomes like a positive feedback loop and they start stressing about sleep too, which also adds more stress and then they can't sleep again. And then a couple also mentioned excessive caffeine use, which is again, I think in line with, needing to take on more responsibilities.
Yeah, so in line with these, we shared a couple of tips and tricks that we heard from guest speakers and also from Dr. Pelayo in Sleep and Dreams with the students. And we wanted to list a couple of the tips that students like the most. So in case you're watching this video and couldn't attend our session, you can have a couple of tips that could be useful for you. So the first one that was really liked was using caffeine strategically rather than just like drinking coffee to stay awake or simply to just boost your energy at like 7 p.m. So we heard in lecture that using caffeine strategically and like trying to not drink coffee past 2 p.m., but remembering that caffeine has a half-life about 3 to 5 hours and doesn't kick in until 30 minutes after use is really important to kind of time your caffeine use so that it doesn't interfere with your sleep, but also boosts your normal energy levels. Another one that we shared that a lot of people were already doing but wanted to do more mindfully was strategic napping. So sort of keeping naps less than 40 minutes to get in a full REM cycle, but not keeping them too long, to just avoid sleeping 3 hours and then that interferes with your night sleep. And also just like not napping super close to bedtime, to not steal from your full night's sleep. And another one that was really liked that a lot of people practice, maybe not in the best ways, was having downtime before bed around about 30 minutes to an hour. So trying to stop using screens because blue light interferes with our circadian rhythm, and instead like doing things like reading to wind down or meditating or making to-do lists or just somehow like calming the mind without trying to like overthink and spiral about falling asleep. People said they have a hard time kind of practicing these things because we're super used to just going on our phones or watching a show before bed, but it might be more useful to kind of just take that time to wind down more mindfully.
And then finally, these are just comments that people left for us. But again, I think most people enjoyed being able to have the time to sort of actually do a deep dive into their sleep habits and possibly think of ways of ameliorating their sleep habits. So I think overall it was sort of like a productive little insomnia support group. And I think people had nice takeaways in the sense that they learned tips, but also just the act of discussing amongst each other kind of helped them lay out all the ways in which maybe their sleep schedules weren't ideal, and what were maybe the causes and stressors behind them.
Yeah, and also I think it was super helpful to hear that other people at Stanford are also struggling with this. So no one is alone in struggling with their sleep in an intense academic environment, because we always have a lot to do. So it's important to know that if you're struggling with these things, you're not alone and there is support around campus, and there are always resources. So we hope that this was helpful, and we're looking forward to other people that might be interested in insomnia further.